Hi everybody, I'm John Willoughby from Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, and I am going to narrate to you the first 9 chapters of the book. In the beginning, we meet Henry Dashwood, who is the father of John Dashwood, and he is the owner of Northern Park. Henry is also the father of Marianne, Eleanor, and Margaret from his current wife. Then Henry dies, and he leaves the estate to John and £10,000 to the Dashwood sisters and their mother. At the beginning, John wants to keep his promise and he wants to give the Dashwood sisters £3,000, but everything changes when John's wife arrives to Northern Park. She thinks that Henry deserves everything, and she wants him to keep everything, the estate and the money. So she starts to convince him to keep everything, including the money. Then in this part of the story we meet Edward, who is Fanny's brother. He's a gentleman-like and a very intelligent man. Edward has a kind of close relationship with Eleanor, but Marianne, who has another type of vision of romance and relationships, she tells her that she thinks different and she doesn't know why Eleanor feels attracted to Edward. But Eleanor defends Edward, saying that he is very intelligent and she finds him beautiful because of that. Mrs. Dashwood doesn't get along with Fanny because she thinks that Fanny treats them like guests in their own house. So they feel like they can't stand near from Fanny. Then a letter arrives, and the letter is from Sir John Middleton, who is the cousin of Mrs. Dashwood. He offers them to come to live in a cottage in Devonshire. Mrs. Dashwood sees this like an opportunity to leave the place the terrible Fanny visits. They finally move to this cottage, and the next morning after moving, Sir John comes to visit them, saying that he is very happy to have them there, and he invites them to go to his house. In Sir John's house, we meet his wife, who is Lady Middleton, and also Lady Middleton's mother and the Colonel Brandon. The same day they have a dinner, and after dinner Marianne plays the piano and sings the song, and everybody is kind of impressed about her talent. So everybody is amazed except Colonel Brandon, who doesn't give like a big expression of surprise because of this, but he appreciates the talent of Marianne. After that, Mr. Jennings, who is the mother-in-law of Sir John, starts to make jokes about Marianne and Colonel Brandon, saying that they could have a good relationship. But Marianne thinks that he's too old for her because he's in his 30s, and I think that she's right. One day, when walking, Marianne and Margaret were caught by a storm. When running down a hill, Marianne stumbles and sprains his ankle. When I saw this, I went to help her. I took her home and I presented myself as Willoughby from nearby Allenham. And of course, I know that I impressed everyone at home.
Hi everyone, I'm Mrs. Dashwood. I'm 4 years old and I will continue with the story. After Marianne's accident, Willoughby visited Marianne since he had fallen in love with her. Marianne learned that Willoughby loved the same kind of dancing and music as she did. Therefore, Willoughby and Marianne spent time together, so I began to anticipate their engagement. But Eleanor began to notice that Colonel Brandon also loved her sister. On the other hand, Marianne and Willoughby believed Brandon And Marian said that Colonel Brandon didn't deserve her love since she didn't see anything attractive on him. For Eleanor, Colonel Brandon was the only one with whom she could probably establish a conversation. And one day, when they were in a party in the Middletons' house, Brandon told Eleanor that Marian reminded him a lover he had in the past. In the morning, Marian told Eleanor that Willoughby had given her a horse, which name was King Mab. But Eleanor told that that gift will be an inconvenience to me. So after that, Marian told Eleanor that she saw when Willoughby cut a lock of Marian's hair and kissed it. And that increased Eleanor's suspicions of the engagement of them. The next day, Marian was trying to hide her feelings of sorrow, but everything around her reminded him, and since no letters from Willoughby arrived, Eleanor asked me to ask Marian about if there were an engagement, but I refused it because of the pain it will cause on Marian. One evening, when Marian and Eleanor were walking around the house, they saw that Edward was arriving. And they, very surprised, welcomed him. I was very surprised too, but I felt so happy for his arrival. Therefore, we noticed that Edward was much more distant and reserved, and I suppose that his coldness will be related with his mother. So I asked him, "What are Mrs. Ferrar's plans for you, dear Edward?" After that, he told me that his mother wished that he could get married with a rich woman to be distinguished in society. Yet, those were not his plans. On the contrary, Marian and Eleanor agreed that they would be so glad if one day they became rich. So Edward told Marian she would spend all her money on music and books, and she was very pleased since he still remembered her characters. The next day, all of us had planned a trip to Withwell, and when we were almost ready to leave the house, Colonel Brandon received a letter to which he must attend immediately in London. Mrs. Jennings was very curious about that departure, and she imagined it had something to do with Miss Williams, Colonel's daughter. One evening, Willoughby objected to my plans to improve the carriage. "Not a stone must be added because I have been so happy here," he said. After I heard that, I realized that he was very interested in the future of our house, declaring his affection and happiness. The next morning, Margaret, Eleanor, and I visited Lady Middleton, and Marian stayed at home. When we returned to the house, I got surprised to see Marian crying, running to her room. And in the fireplace, I found Willoughby looking sad. And he informed me that his aunt needed him to go to London for the whole year. And after ignoring my invitation, I made him to visit us as soon as possible. He left the house. On the other hand, my poor and sweet Marian was depressed and fragile, crying for the whole day.
Hello, I'm Marianne Dashwood and I'm 16 years old. Let's continue with this unexpected and beautiful story. Well, after Edward's silence, my sister Eleanor noticed about Edward's suffered and strange behavior, so she doubted a little bit about his feelings toward her. But the next morning, he came to the Barton cottage to have breakfast with us. But I tried to let them alone and I couldn't because he told us that he needed to see his horses exactly at that time. Anyways, when he returned, he looked so admired because of the beautiful sight seen. So it was an interesting topic for me and I started to ask many questions about the landscape and many details, but he just told me, "Stop, Marianne. Don't ask many questions because I do not have the knowledge to answer them. I won't describe the landscape as you would like me to do it." And in fact, he was right. So at that moment, I noticed about his ring and his finger, and that ring had a lock of hair in it. So I asked him if that hair was from his sister Fanny, and he told me that in fact it was. The day finished, and the next day, Mrs. Jennings and Mr. John invited everyone to a dance. But I was so sad because my love Willoughby wouldn't be there with me, so I cried out. Edward stayed for a week at the Barton cottage and then left. Elinor felt so sad, but she was so different from me because she didn't show off her emotions. Well, one morning, Lady Middleton, Mrs. Jennings, and Sir John introduced us, the Palmers. Mrs. Palmer was Lady Middleton's sister, and she was so happy and friendly, really unlike her sister, right? On the other hand, Mr. Palmer was a serious-looking man. So we talked for a long time and discussed many things. And also, Mrs. Palmer, whose name is Charlotte, admired all the pictures at the Barton cottage. Then they invited us to go with them to London, but we denied it. The next day, they left. In that moment, Mrs. Jennings introduced us, Anne and Lucy. They were sisters. And in fact, Anne was not interesting for me, but Lucy was so friendly and so different from Anne. So she found a friend in Elinor and started talking. They used to go for large walks at the Barton Park, and in one of those walks, Lucy told Elinor that she had a big secret. She told her that she had been engaged for 4 years with a man, and the name of the man was Edward Ferrars. Yes, the same Edward Ferrars as Elinor, but Elinor didn't say anything about her feelings toward Edward and about their relationship, and just was shocked. Well, January came and Mrs. Jennings invited Elinor and I to go with her to London. I was so excited. Elinor, not much, but our mother told us that we must go. So we went. When we got there, we started writing some letters. Elinor told me that I would stop writing because she was already writing to our mother, but I told her that I wasn't writing to our mother. Then she didn't ask more. You know, I was writing the letter to my love Willoughby because the only thing I wanted was to see him. I waited for him the long day, but the only person that came to visit us was Governor Brandon. So I started crying because it was not Willoughby. But during the day, I just wanted to see Willoughby, and I couldn't because he never came to visit me.
Hello, I am Edward Ferrars from Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, and I will narrate the book from chapter 27 to 30. Well, at this point of the play, Marianne is still very anxious because she hadn't received any answer from John. Mrs. Jennings consoles Marianne by telling her that it is very likely that John is busy hunting at his country estate. So Marianne continues to write him letters. Well, after some days, Lady Middleton invites Mrs. Jennings to a gathering, so she and the two sisters go. When they arrive home, Mrs. Jennings is very surprised because Willoughby wasn't there in the gathering, because Sir John has met Willoughby in town that day, and he invited Willoughby personally. In those days, Brandon arrives to speak with Elinor in private to know if Marianne and Willoughby were engaged. So he confesses his love to Marianne and wishes her all the imaginable happiness. Days later, Elinor and Marianne attend a party with Lady Middleton. There, Elinor sees Willoughby with a very fashionable young woman. Willoughby blows slightly to Elinor as Marianne, gluing, rises to go to him, and he acts as he barely knows Marianne. But Willoughby returns to the young woman's side, and Marianne feels terribly abashed, so Elinor takes her home. Early the next morning, Marianne cries and Elinor can't comfort her, so she writes for the last time to Willoughby. At breakfast, Marianne can't eat, and when a letter from Willoughby arrives, she races to her room to read it. Marianne gives Elinor the letter in which Willoughby informs her in cold, formal language that his affections have long been engaged elsewhere, and he also has returned her letters and the lock of hair. Then Mrs. Jennings arrives full of compassion to confirm that Willoughby is engaged with a Miss Grey. Colonel Brandon arrives and gives Elinor information that he hopes will comfort the family. He speaks again of his tragic story with his cousin Eliza, who had a baby, and before dying he made Brandon promise that he would take care of her little girl. A year ago, Eliza Williams vanished. She finally wrote to Brandon to explain that a young man had seduced her, made her pregnant, and abandoned her. He later realizes that this young man was John Willoughby. Some days later, John Dashwood, after calling on them at Mrs. Jennings and on a private stroll to the Middletons, he congratulates Elinor on her upcoming marriage to Colonel Brandon. John, with the purpose of annoying Elinor, also tells her that Mrs. Ferrers wants to see me married to a Miss Morton. John Dashwood also pronounces that Marianne's illness has damaged her youthful good looks, and he thinks that Elinor now can do better in the marriage market. Impressed by the Middletons' wealth, John and Fanny host a dinner for them, inviting Colonel Brandon, the Steele sisters, the Dashwood sisters, Mrs. Jennings, and Mrs. Ferrer. Elinor worries about seeing me there, but she also wants to meet my mother. At the dinner, Mrs. Ferrers and Fanny treat Lucy graciously to hurt Elinor. Still later, John Dashwood praises the screens that Elinor has painted to Colonel Brandon, and this gives an opening to Mrs. Ferrers and Fanny to insult Elinor. Mrs. Ferrers says that Elinor's work is pretty, but agrees with Fanny that Mrs. Morton's work is beautiful. Finally, Marianne defends her sister and goes to comfort Elinor.
Hi everyone, I'm Elinor and I will continue telling you the story. After the party, I was left with no curiosity to meet Mrs. Ferrers again, as she was very unpolite. However, in the visit that Lucy paid me the next day, she claimed that Mrs. Ferrers is a really charming woman. As we were talking about this, Edward entered the room, created a really awkward atmosphere. As no one else was speaking, I made myself conversation. However, when I was trying to squeeze out, Marianne entered also the room. After some more awkward moments, Lucy and Edward finally left. Some days later, we received good news. Mrs. Palmer had given birth a son, so Mrs. Jenny started to spend more time with her taking care of the newborn. For our side, Marianne and I are forced to spend more time with the Mrs. Steels. Some days later, we are invited to a musical party. At this party, I have the pleasure to meet Mrs. Robert Ferrars, whose behavior reminded me of Mrs. Ferrars, as he was barely polite and truly arrogant. Days later, we know that the secret of Lucy's and Edward's engagement is now public. While the Mrs. Steels were staying at my brother's house, and revealed the secret of Lucy's engagement with Edward. Of course, this made angry Fanny, and she kicked them out of the house without letting them pack their things. Days later, we know by my brother that Edward is now disinherited and has no money to marry. The next Sunday, I went with Mrs. Janice to the Kennington's garden. There, I found Anne, and she told me the latest news. After the secret of the engagement of Edward was known, Edward spent 3 days away. When he came back, he told Lucy that they should break up the engagement, but Lucy denied. However, in the letter that I received from Lucy some days later, she claimed that she was the one who proposed to break up the engagement, but Edward denied as he truly loved her. Days later, I received the visit of Colonel Brandon, and he says he would propose Edward to be a clergyman at Delaford with a pay of £200. This is, of course, a great news, so I express my gratitude, and I dispose myself to tell the news to Edward. Before I can express the news to Edward by the written form by sending him a letter, he came over, and I explained to him the offer of Colonel Brandon. Edward accepted, very grateful, and he left. Later, Mrs. Jennings arrived home, and she congratulated me as she thought I was marrying Colonel Brandon. She overheard the conversation I had before with him, and she thought I would marry him. However, I explained her that I would not marry with Colonel Brandon, as I am not even engaged with him. I explained that Colonel Brandon offered a job for Edward, and that Edward and Lucy would be able to marry soon, thanks to this. Days later, because I felt obliged to do so, I went to check on Fanny's health. There, my brother received me, and he is shocked for the generosity of Colonel Brandon to Edward. He also says that after the engagement of Lucy and Edward was known, Mrs. Ferrars confessed that she would have preferred me as her daughter-in-law, as I was the best of the worst for her son. When I finally met Fanny Dashwood, she is more kind to me than usual. In early April, we finally left London with Mrs. Jennings, Colonel Brandon, and the Palmer. While leaving London, Marianne cries, but I am relieved as I am finally able to escape the persecution of Lucy's friendship. As we had previously arranged, we go to Cleveland. While being at Cleveland, I found out the deep feelings of love of Colonel Brandon for my sister Marianne. Also, Marianne unfortunately catches a cold because of the cold water and the long walks in the outside that she liked to take.
Hi, my name is Colonel Brandon, and I will continue with the story from chapter 43 until the end, which is chapter 50. As you already know, Marianne was terribly ill. She had a fever that was almost killing her, and I was so worried about not just seeing her again. I couldn't do more but help Eleanor to take care about Marianne. Eleanor asked me to go to look for Miss Miss Dashwood, and that's exactly what I did. The same day I left, Willoughby got to the house to talk with Eleanor.
He was walking and he was very, very drunk.
He basically wanted to explain the reasons for which he did all he did to Marianne, and he wanted to ask for forgiveness. He explained that he first was a selfish man who just wanted to have fun with Marianne, but as soon as he realized how awesome Marianne is, he fell in love with her. He wanted to marry Marianne, but the problem was that Mrs. Smith realized about a mistake he made in the past, and she basically inherited him. So he at the end decided money over the love he felt with Marianne, because he married with Miss Grey, with Lady Grey, because she had a fortune, she had a lot of money. The next day I got to the house with Miss Dashwood, and Eleanor received us with great news. Of course, we all were so worried about the health of Marianne, but Eleanor told us that she was getting better. A few days later, Miss Dashwood and the two girls decided to return to Barton, and everything was trying to be normal again. The three sisters and Miss Dashwood were living again in the same place in Barton. So one day, Eleanor and Marianne went for a walk, and Eleanor told her about everything Willoughby had said about Marianne. Marianne was so sad but so happy at the same time, because she learned that she has to control her emotions and that she has to behave properly, because she realized that when she was with Willoughby, she was behaving like very unpolitely, and she couldn't control her emotions. So on the other hand, she was so sad because she really loved Willoughby. Days passed by, and everything was like getting normal again. However, Marianne was so sad because of everything that happened with Willoughby. Then, some days later, Mr. Thomas went to London and returned to Barton with news. And the news was that Mr. Ferrars had gotten married with Lucy Steele. Of course, Miss Dashwood and the three sisters were astonished because of the announcement Mr. Thomas had already said. And they started to ask many questions to know if it was true or if it was a mistake. And Mr. Thomas said again and once again that he was sure that it was Edward Ferrars with Lucy Steele that had gotten married. Then days passed by again, and no more news had arrived to their home. Eleanor was waiting for me because I was in London too, and she wanted me to tell her if I knew something about everything that was happening. However, the day they were waiting for me, someone arrived, and it was not me, it was Edward Ferrars. Edward Ferrars got to the house, and Miss Dashwood asked about Mr. Ferrars, referring to his wife, Lucy Steele, and he said that he was not married with her, that it was a mistake, that Robert Ferrars, his brother, was married with Lucy Steele. She basically, once Edward Ferrars was in Oxford, Lucy still sent him a letter to explain him that she wanted to marry with Mr. Robert Ferrars. And days passed by again. Eleanor was so happy because Edward was the love of her life, and she was so excited, so happy. So as her mom and Marianne and Margaret was too. Well, basically, Edward returned to London to ask for forgiveness with his mom. His mom gave him a quantity of money for him to survive, and she accepted that he could marry with Eleanor. And the story finishes with Marianne and with me getting married, but also with Edward Ferrars and Eleanor getting married too. And this is the end of this wonderful book, Sense and Sensibility. Probably you didn't expect it to be like that, but we hope you have enjoyed it. So thank you so much for your attention.